May 1st, 1945. Hitler's body smolders in the Chancellery garden. Deep inside the Führerbunker, one man clutches a bundle of documents and prepares to flee. Martin Bormann, Hitler's shadowy private secretary, has just witnessed the fall of the Reich, and now he vanishes. Outside, Soviet artillery tears Berlin apart. As chaos erupts, Bormann joins a small group in a last-ditch breakout attempt. He was never seen alive again. What happened next would ignite decades of speculation, false sightings, and one of history's most enduring mysteries. But before we uncover the truth behind his disappearance, we need to understand who this man really was. He wasn't a general. He never gave a speech. Yet by 1945, his signature meant more than Göring's. So how did Martin Bormann become the most powerful man no one saw coming? Martin Bormann's journey from insignificance to Hitler's indispensable shadow reveals how ruthless ambition and administrative cunning could outshine even the most iconic faces of Nazi leadership. Born in 1900 to a postal workers' family, Bormann's early life showed little promise of his future. After serving briefly in World War I, he joined the right-wing Freikorps paramilitary group. His participation in the 1924 murder of his former teacher, Walter Kadow, earned him a prison sentence but established his nationalist credentials. By 1927, he had joined the Nazi Party, where he revealed his true talent, administrative efficiency. Unlike charismatic figures such as Goebbels or Göring, Bormann possessed meticulous organizational skills. By 1933, when Hitler seized power, he had secured a position as Chief of Staff to Rudolf Hess, placing himself at the center of Nazi authority. While others commanded public attention, Bormann worked behind the scenes, constructing a web of bureaucratic control that would eventually make him indispensable. Bormann understood that controlling access to Hitler meant controlling the Reich itself. He transformed his seemingly administrative role into a position of extraordinary influence by determining which visitors and which documents reached the Führer. Nazi officials increasingly needed his approval to gain Hitler's ear, making Bormann the gatekeeper of the crumbling Reich. Bormann tightened his grip further by managing Hitler's personal finances. He oversaw the Adolf Hitler Fund, a slush fund fed by voluntary donations from German industry. With no oversight, Bormann controlled millions. The decisive moment in Bormann's ascent came in May 1941, with Rudolf Hess's unauthorized flight to Britain. Hitler appointed Bormann as head of the party Chancellery, making him the chief administrator of the Nazi Party. Like a spider at the center of a vast web, Bormann now controlled the entire party apparatus, issuing directives in Hitler's name while systematically eliminating rivals. As Germany's fortunes declined after 1942, Bormann's influence grew. With Hitler increasingly withdrawn, Bormann became the de facto ruler of domestic affairs. By 1945, he had outmaneuvered all rivals. Göring had fallen from favor, Goebbels was occupied with propaganda, and Himmler was distrusted. Bormann remained Hitler's constant companion, earning the nickname Brown Eminence, the power behind the throne in the collapsing Third Reich. But power in the Nazi regime came with a price. As Germany crumbled, the man who once controlled access to Hitler would be trapped underground, with nowhere left to hide. As the Brown Eminence secured his position at Hitler's side, the physical space where that power would play out was shrinking dramatically. On January 16, 1945, Hitler's inner circle descended into the cramped concrete corridors of the Führerbunker beneath Berlin, a subterranean complex that would become the final command center for Nazi leadership. While Soviet artillery began its advance toward the capital, Bormann transformed this underground refuge into his administrative headquarters, continuing to exercise his considerable influence even as the Reich collapsed around them. The damp concrete walls and artificial lighting created an environment where paranoia and desperation flourished. Despite these claustrophobic conditions, Bormann maintained his methodical approach to power. He sent endless communications to German forces across the shrinking territory still under Nazi control, repeatedly urging troops to continue fighting despite overwhelming odds, revealing his refusal to acknowledge the inevitability of defeat. By mid-April, the situation had become dire. The Battle of Berlin began on April 16th, with Soviet forces completely encircling the city just 3 days later. As the Red Army tightened its grip, Bormann's role shifted from administrator to chronicler of the Reich's final moments. His presence at Hitler's side never wavered. He remained the constant shadow, documenting and facilitating the Führer's last decisions. In these dark hours, even as death loomed, Bormann's loyalty elevated him to a final position of prominence. On April 29, 1945, Hitler dictated his final will and testament, describing Bormann as "my most faithful party comrade" and naming him the executor of his estate. Hitler designated Bormann as party minister, effectively making him the highest-ranking Nazi who would remain alive after Hitler's death. This promotion represented the peak of Bormann's bureaucratic ascension, symbolically important yet meaningless amid the Reich's collapse. In those underground chambers, he had achieved what his more charismatic rivals could not: total trust from the Führer until the very end. When Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives on April 30th, Bormann personally participated in carrying their bodies to the Reich Chancellery garden for burning, according to Hitler's instructions. With this grim task completed, reality set in. The protective shadow of the Führer was gone, and his own survival was now in question. With Hitler gone and the Reich in ruins, Bormann vanished into history. But what followed wasn't peace, it was a decades-long hunt across 3 continents, fueled by sightings, secrets, and Cold War paranoia. After failed negotiations with Soviet forces and Goebbels' death on May 1st, Bormann began planning his escape. The man who had built his career on meticulous organization now faced a situation where administrative skills offered no advantage. Bormann prepared to escape, carrying what may have been the most crucial document of the Third Reich's final hours, Hitler's last will and testament. It named him as one of the regime's final leaders, even as it doubled as a potential death warrant should the Allies discover it. The document that would elevate Bormann to the highest echelons of Nazi leadership now marked his transformation from power broker to ghost. As the Reich crumbled around him, the man who had controlled access to Hitler simply vanished into the chaos of Berlin's final days. What followed would become one of the most extensive manhunts in history, spanning continents and decades as investigators pursued the shadow who had once wielded enormous power. In the immediate aftermath of Berlin's fall, conflicting accounts of Bormann's fate emerged. Arthur Axmann, the Hitler youth leader who had attempted to flee alongside Bormann, claimed he discovered Bormann's body near the Lehrte train station. Without physical evidence, Allied investigators remained unconvinced, leading the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg to try Bormann in absentia in 1946. The empty chair at the tribunal symbolized the mystery surrounding his whereabouts as he received a death sentence that could only be executed if he were found. This uncertainty launched a decades-long international manhunt. By 1964, West German authorities offered 100,000 Deutschmarks for information leading to his capture, equivalent to several years' salary for the average German worker, highlighting the importance of finding this architect of Nazi crimes. Over time, reported sightings multiplied across South America. Argentina, Paraguay, and Chile became focal points for investigation, with witnesses claiming to have encountered the former Nazi leader living under assumed identities. Simon Wiesenthal, the tenacious Nazi hunter who had dedicated his life to bringing war criminals to justice, became convinced that Bormann had escaped to South America. Wiesenthal theorized that Odessa or similar clandestine groups had provided Bormann with false documentation and safe passage, a theory strengthened as other fugitives like Eichmann and Mengele were discovered in South American countries. Yet a contradictory theory emerged from Reinhard Gehlen, a former German intelligence chief. Gehlen claimed Bormann had been a Soviet spy throughout the war who had escaped to Moscow after Berlin's fall, an extraordinary assertion suggesting Hitler's closest advisor worked for Germany's greatest enemy. The mystery seemed close to resolution in 1963 when Albert Krumnau, a retired postal worker, supported Axmann's account. Krumnau told authorities he had buried 2 bodies near the Lehrte station shortly after the war, one wearing an SS doctor's uniform, aligning with reports that Bormann had escaped with Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger. However, excavations at the site in 1965 yielded no human remains, complicating the narrative and lending credence to theories that Bormann might have successfully escaped Germany altogether. The failed dig only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators to wonder if Bormann's body wasn't where witnesses claimed it was. Had he truly vanished into the post-war world? While the failed 1965 excavation only deepened the Bormann mystery, 7 years later, the ground itself would reveal a secret that had been hiding just meters from where investigators had searched. On December 7, 1972, construction workers digging near Berlin's Lehrte station made a startling recovery. Buried beneath the rubble of post-war Berlin lay 2 skeletons, just 12 meters from the location where Albert Krumnau had claimed to have buried bodies in 1945. The find would trigger a significant investigation spanning 3 decades and ultimately rewrite the final chapter of Hitler's shadowy right-hand man. Initial forensic examination provided compelling evidence. The skulls of both skeletons contained tiny glass fragments embedded in their jaw areas, indicating a cyanide capsule. the escape method favored by Nazi leadership facing capture. These glass ampoules, when bitten, released hydrogen cyanide for a rapid death. This distinctive characteristic suggested these weren't ordinary casualties of Berlin's fall. The evidence mounted when Hitler's former dentist, Hugo Blaschke, reconstructed Bormann's dental records from memory, which matched one of the recovered skulls. The skeleton also showed collarbone damage consistent with Bormann's riding accident from 1939. These physical markers formed a scientific foundation for identification, leading forensic specialists to undertake facial reconstruction in 1973. The reconstructions proved convincing enough for the West German government to officially declare Martin Bormann dead. Without modern DNA testing, Nazi hunters and conspiracy theorists continued pointing to South American sightings, suggesting the remains could be misidentified or deliberately planted. The case had become too entangled with Cold War politics and the mythology of Nazi escape networks to be resolved by traditional forensic methods alone. German authorities preserved the evidence for over 20 years in a prosecutor's vault in Karlsruhe. The definitive answer came in 1998, when German authorities ordered genetic testing on skull fragments. Professor Wolfgang Eisenmenger of Ludwig Maximilian University applied DNA technology unavailable decades earlier. By comparing genetic material from the skull with DNA samples from Bormann's blood relative, scientists reach an unequivocal conclusion: the remains belonged to Martin Bormann. This scientific breakthrough conclusively proved that Bormann had never escaped to South America or found refuge in Moscow. Instead, he had died in Berlin during the early hours of May 2, 1945, likely by his own hand. Hitler's powerful gatekeeper had perished anonymously in the capital's ruins, his body lying undiscovered for nearly 3 decades, while elaborate escape theories flourished around the world. Martin Bormann's fate stands as a powerful testament to the inevitable collapse of the Nazi regime. Despite being one of the most influential figures in Hitler's inner circle, he could not escape the consequences of his crimes. His trial in absentia and death sentence affirmed that even behind-the-scenes architects of atrocity would face judgment. The ruins of Berlin buried not just a fugitive, but the last remnants of an inescapable tyranny. His wife Gerda died of cancer in 1946, while their children scattered to foster homes. His eldest son, Martin Adolf, became a Catholic priest, rejecting his father's ideology. This transformation within a single generation prompts us to consider, can history's judgment ever truly be escaped by those who orchestrate evil? Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. We hope you found this video informative. If you enjoyed learning about today's topic, make sure to check out our video, What Happened to Hitler's Family After World War II. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more World War II content. And we'll see you in the next one.